let's talk about NAGPRA. The Native American Graves and Repatriations Act, otherwise known as NAGPRA, is a piece of regulatory U.S. legislation that is acting on museums and federal agencies in regards to how we treat Native American artifacts. In its best form, NAGPRA would halt the display of burial goods and ceremonial artifacts from any Native American tribe in museums that receive state or federal funding. And those artifacts and burial goods would be repatriated to the tribes that they initially belonged to before that museum had a hold of them. Since it was enacted in 1990, NAGPRA has returned 1,111 bodies to Native American tribes and 3,900 associated funerary objects. This seems like a success, but as of 2023, 52% of the human remains that museums have had not undergone their regulatory processes fully. There's a fuck ton of problems with NAGPRA as well that are outside of people just not completing the proper regulatory processes or going through the proper channel. One of the most glaring issues is that you can only have claim to artifacts or remains if your tribe is federally recognized. So even if you're a tribe with like state recognition, if you don't have federal recognition, you have no claim to any bodies or artifacts. NAGPRA is an important piece of legislation, but it does require some intergovernmental accountability that isn't super regularly seen. NAGPRA also notably does not apply to private collections. So if you are a privately owned museum, NAGPRA doesn't apply to you. You don't need to worry about it. Which is a whole nother can of worms that I'm not going to open right now. On the museum side of things, NAGPRA also requires very strict oversight that doesn't usually happen. What should be happening is that each museum that has artifacts that could be applied to NAGPRA should have a NAGPRA coordinator who is in charge of like communicating with the tribes that the objects belong to, and also just going through records and making sure that everything is in order. A lot of museums don't have someone dedicated to this position, meaning that museums are spread too thin to be able to actually give a shit about NAGPRA. Even with some of the problems associated with it, NAGPRA is responsible for a few repatriations, and I think that that is a very good thing, and it's important that it exists, and it should continue to exist. We love NAGPRA. I'm not going to say who posted it because I don't want people to like find their blog and harass them, but there was this one post on Tumblr I saw a little bit ago that really made me mad. It reads, "The main problem I have with America is that nothing's old as hell there. I can't be so far away from a castle. It damages my aura." There are a bunch of super old structures in America that I just don't see people talk about, and that's where this post comes from. This right here is a picture of Poverty Point. Poverty Point is made up of a bunch of different mounds that create that, like, half-circle shape that you see in the image. And these mounds were constructed in, like, 1200 BC. Like, they are old as hell. It is a structure that is old as hell. That was made by people. There are two main theories as to what this site was initially used for. One is that it was, like, a settlement, like a big bustling city town type deal. The other one, and this one I like better, is that it was a meeting place for a bunch of different peoples in the area to gather and do trade stuff. And that's not even an isolated example. Like, there are a fuck ton of these mounds around the state. This right here is an artist recreation of Cahokia, and this is what the site looks like now. Cahokia is basically our first example of a, like, modern city. There were plazas for people to gather in. There were jobs that people had. There were artisans. There was a ton of shit going on. They also have this thing called Woodhenge at the Cahokia site. Cahokia is like a really important site. They had agriculture as well. A lot of the artifacts from there are also really fun because they had like artisans that worked there, so there's a lot of cool art. I beg you to do like a simple Google search and just look through Cahokian artifacts. It's really sick. This is not really a city, but it's another example of a really cool earthwork. This is Okmulgee National Park in Georgia. Moving away from earthworks, this is Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado. There was a wild drought in around 1300 that drove most of the people who were living here out. However, before then, there were about 5,000 people living in these cliff dwellings. Mesa Verde National Park also includes a bunch of cave paintings, if that's something you're into, most of which date to around the same time as the cliff dwellings did. Which again, old as hell and cool as shit. Another reason that original post wanted me to go off like this is because it's vaguely like white supremacist thinking to continue going in this spiral of like, oh, there's no old ass structures in America. Of course, America did have ancient peoples, and those ancient peoples built ancient structures that are old as hell. And the ancestors of the people who made those ancient structures are still living here today. And America has awesome old-ass structures if you know where to look for them. How did people make it over here to America? I'm gonna tell you some theories. Before we get into any of the theories, the most recent, carbon dated archaeological evidence dictates, 22,000 years at least that people have been over here. And that is carbon dates from footprints found in White Sands National Park in New Mexico, which, pretty awesome if you ask. And even other than the White Sands evidence, there's tons of oral history evidence that Native Americans have been here for, ever. And the White Sands National Park evidence just further proves that, which is epic and awesome. Number one, we got the beloved land bridge theory. We've all heard this theory. It's a pretty prominent plot point in one of the Ice Age movies. I forget which one, but it is a plot point in one. It basically says that there was an ice bridge that connected Serbia to the Americas, and people would chase big game through those ice areas for the period of 5,000-ish years that they were. Then that bridge melted, and people were in the Americas and ready to do America thing. There's a reason this is the one all of us know about and we were taught in school. It's pretty sound, it has a lot of support for it, and it's honestly a good theory. I like it. It's nice. Then there's the Kelp Highway hypothesis. This says that ancient fisher people followed the Pacific Rim into the Americas. This one is also highly plausible. I think that both can exist at the same time. There can be some peoples that came from the Kelp Highway, some peoples that came from the land bridge that was there before. Both can be true. And I think both are true, honestly. And then there's the Solutrean hypothesis, which is honestly bullshit. Because the evidence for it is hey, these points from these arrowheads from Europe look vaguely kind of similar to these arrowheads from around the same time in North America. Europeans came here, ? Just so everyone's aware, this is one of the points from North America, otherwise known as a Clovis point. And these are the points from Europe, otherwise known as the Solutrean points. Now, if you were to look at those side by side, do you think you would say that those are the same exact point? The Solutrean hypothesis does, baby. To me, it honestly just reads as an excuse for colonization. It's Europeans, they've been here the whole time. Look, Solutrean hypothesis. It doesn't take natural history into account in the same way that the Kelp Highway and the land bridge do, which is why it is very flimsy to me. But yeah, at the end of the day, believe what you want to believe. I'm going to believe the land bridge and Kelp Highway theories. If you do your own research and think that the Solutrean hypothesis is true, I disagree with you, but go for it. Hot take, but I think that agriculture workers should be talking to people more. Because, here we've been using methods that aren't working. We don't take into account that America is completely different from, Europe, and we do agriculture the same way that we would in a European landscape, which is stupid. My solution? Talk to indigenous people, maybe. Collaborate on projects together. Their ancestors have been here longer than you. They know more shit about how the land works. And I'm not saying to exploit indigenous people for their knowledge. No, that's dumb. I'm saying that there are ways of knowing that aren't just traditional European science stuff. The scientific method that you're taught in school is not the only way to do science. There are solutions to our modern agricultural problems that we just haven't taken seriously because we have this habit of not taking indigenous people seriously. There have been agricultural societies on this land since before people who look like me came here. Traditional knowledge is not just nothing. It's worked for thousands of years. It can work now. Who would know better how to take care of crops than people whose ancestors bred those crops for human consumption? Our second largest agricultural export here in the States is corn, which was bred here. A lot of our native bumblebee species are also disappearing, which is absolutely awful for a lot of fruit production. Because you know what was happening thousands of years ago? We weren't losing all of the bees. People have been here caring for this land essentially since agriculture has existed. People have been here caring for this land since people have started to settle down and create cities and agriculture. There is archaeological evidence of prescribed burning and different types of resource management that had to happen in order for this land to exist. America was not untouched land before Christopher Columbus came here. Native people cared for this land in a way that made sense and in a way that was sustainable. Because guess what? America has different ecology than, like, Spain and Britain and the main people who colonized. Therefore, we must use the ecological practices of the people who actually know this land in order to protect it and care for it. So the big solution to all of our problems is to talk to people and to learn from others, which, wow, what a shock. Yes. If you would like general information about any of the things I talk about in that video, I suggest Googling Traditional Ecological Knowledge, or TEK, as that's the thing that I was talking about in the video that I'm responding to right now. There's also a really great TED Talk by Lila June called 3,000-Year-Old Solutions to Modern Problems, and I highly recommend checking that out as well. A cool nonprofit that's using traditional ecological knowledge in their work is the Lomakatsi Restoration Project, and they do a lot of cool watershed and forest restoration in California and Oregon. Oregon State University also has a few projects going on that utilize this line of thing. One that I really like is the Pacific Northwest Tribal Forest and Native Seed Restoration Project, and that's basically reintroduction of native plants that are important to the peoples of those areas. And all of the data collected on that and all the other, like, ethnobotany and traditional ecological projects that the University of Oregon is doing, none of that information is released to the public without express permission from the tribes that they're working with. The website might look jank, but trust me on this one, Alaska Native Knowledge Network, awesome resource. The Organic Farming Research Foundation acknowledges that traditional ecological knowledge is a thing that they should involve in their work, and also acknowledges that they're not just trying to steal knowledge away from indigenous people and claim it as their own. They very specifically say, hey, we're a white-led organization and we recognize that. We're just trying to learn, which, respect. With that, government organizations are also sort of trying to integrate it into their work, like the USDA, the Fish and Wildlife Service. Both have statements on their websites about traditional ecological knowledge. But again, those are government organizations, so take it with a grain of salt. But honestly, there's a lot of really good work happening, and if you, like, search where you live, traditional ecological knowledge projects after it on Google, you'll find at least one person who's trying to integrate that into their work. And this is one of the reasons that, like, I feel so hopeful about the state of our world and the fact that things can get better, because there are a lot of people in these fields that are trying really, really hard to make a difference and improve and continue learning. Improving this planet and improving the way that we treat it is a collaborative effort that should include everyone. And it makes me feel really hopeful that people are starting to see that.